Okay,
We are recording.
we're good to go. Fabulous. Brilliant. Well, I was going to say good evening, but it's evening where I am, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Really depends on where you are in the world, and thank you for joining us from wherever you happen to be. If you are joining us from outside of the UK, it'd be great to hear from you, so do say a hi in the chat and let us know where you are joining from. Before I introduce our speakers, just a few formalities. We have our code of conduct, as those of you who have joined our meetups before will be aware of. If you have joined before, welcome back. If you're joining for the first time, warm welcome to you. Our code of conduct is available in the Hive, the Slack channel. So do familiarise yourself with that. In short, we ask that you be respectful for one another. We want everybody to have a harassment-free experience. So do read that if you've not read that before. A couple other quick things. The way we've done the last few, so as those of you who joined us before, we're basically doing a weekly virtual series. So what we typically do is we will, I'll introduce the speakers. The speakers will do their presentation, then we will facilitate a Q&A. Depending on the numbers, it's kind of easier to do it that way. So if you do have questions or they arise as we go through the presentation, please add them into the chat window, prefix them with a Q, so the team and I can sift them out and then relay them back to Johanna and Mark at the end of the session. And if the numbers become smaller, then perhaps we can do something slightly different, but we're open to ideas. So that's that. We'll also do a few community shout outs at the end and just let you know what else we've got coming up. I think that's that. So with that, warm welcome to our speakers tonight. Johanna, Rothman, Mark Kilby, joining us all the way from Boston, from across the pond. Fabulous to have you here tonight.
I'm from Boston and Mark is from...
Mark's from Florida, yes. Sorry, I keep forgetting that. Thanks for that. Great to have you here. As we've said to people, we're looking to put together sessions which are relevant to lots of us and the changing landscape we find ourselves in. Our reality is changing very much so. We just had a little chat about some of the things we're all experiencing. So, life and work is changing as we go from sort of being co-located to distributed to effectively dispersed. And I'm sure Johanna and Mark will go on to talk a lot about how we manage that and how to keep communicating and collaborating and adding value effectively in this changing reality. And with that, I'll hand over to Mark and Johanna. Thank you for joining us, and I really look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. I'm thrilled to be here. All right, Mark, take it away.
Happy to do that. So with the new reality that we're all dealing with, distributed teams are more than the norm. We actually put this slide together way before March when we found that many teams, I would depend on which survey that you looked at. Some would say 50%, 60%, 70%. It just depended on which one you looked at. But they were the norm. And the advice still out there was don't do that. Well, it would be deadly right now to try to be co-located. So that is obviously not practical advice for these days. And with the teams that we both worked with, it was obvious to us that of the 12 principles from the Agile Manifesto, which is what you're seeing here on the right, we could check off many of those. So we definitely satisfied the customer with the work those teams did. We welcomed change. There was trust on our distributed teams. But where some of the questions came in were, is this really face-to-face, what we're doing with? And are we truly collaborating daily? As we go through the rest of this presentation, we'll let you answer those questions. Johanna?
So when Mark and I sat down to write this book, which was, I no longer remember which Agile conference, Mark, but not that long
2017.
ago. Okay, thank you. In 2017, we were walking to the last session on Friday, and I said, "You see anything interesting?" He said, "Not really about distributed." I said, "Me neither." So that's when we decided to write the book. And when we are still of the opinion that teams should choose distribution or dispersal. However, it got chosen for us. So, given that it got chosen for us, let's figure out how to do this right. So, on our next slide, we have a picture of what an Agile team looks like. And if you think about what Agile, now, not all of you are really want to use Agile approaches or really would maybe check off the internal box that says you are an Agile team. But we find that the more we think about what Agile teams are, the more that works for distributed work. So if you think about what an Agile team does, they somehow get ideas into and a responsible person creates a ranked backlog. If you're using iterations, that person is a product owner. If you're not using iterations, who knows what you're calling that person. This cross-functional team produces shippable product on a regular basis. They demo and they retrospect, and then they get more. So what's interesting about this team is that every single person has the necessary skills and capabilities that the team needs so they can deliver on their objectives. And the team is committed to a common purpose or goal. And this is from the product side, this is something that's really important. If you don't have all the people you need, and if they cannot commit to a common purpose or a goal, they are not affiliated together. They don't have affinity, and that makes any kind of distributed or dispersed work impossible. Mark, do you want to talk some more about the rest of this?
Sure. Now, you might be thinking these days it might be hard to commit to anything because we're so distracted with our new work situation. Maybe you have kids at home that want your attention, or you have to help homeschool now, or you might have sick family members. But this is where it's even more important to operate as an Agile team and be committed to that common purpose or goal. As it says here, it's really an interdependence. So as part of that, it's understanding what each of you brings to the team, but also what you need out of the team, especially in this more challenging time. And that's where working as a true Agile team can truly help out everyone on the team as well as the business.
And really help in terms of being distributed, right? Where we are not together, if we purposefully work as a team and we have this common purpose or goal, we're much more likely to succeed. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So as we started to look at how we work with teams and what translated into the virtual and what didn't, and this was comparing us working together the last 2 or 3 years, but looking over really combined 20 years of each for each of us, various teams, various scenarios, various industries. We realized it's not trying to translate the practices directly, it's stepping back and looking at what are some of the common principles. So whether you're more familiar with Scrum or extreme programming or SAFe, there is some underlying principles or values to each of those. And we looked across that landscape and said, okay, what do we see in common with these successful distributed teams? And these are the values that we came up with that we're going to talk to you about this evening.
Okay, so the first one is, and yeah, please go on, is establish acceptable hours of overlap. And we see this as, well, all of the principles really are a continuum. I think that somebody is having trouble with their audio. If you are having trouble with your audio, please let South Palm know. I'm not sure why I'm hearing bits and pieces of stuff. So if you have fewer than 3 hours of overlap in a given day, it's really hard to make any kind of teamwork work. If you have more than 8 hours of overlap, and a lot of people are having trouble creating boundaries around the work, they tend to want to work more because there's a lot of pressure from our organizations to make us work more. But we find that for a distributed agile team, if you don't have at least 4 hours of overlap, you are not really able to do the work. So it used to be that I created this time zone bubble chart, and maybe you can. When I ask this question in person, I always say, "What kind of hours of overlap do you see?" And Mark, do you want to explain it? And I can try and figure out what to do with the people who are not muted.
Sure. So with this simple view, and some of you might be dealing with more international teams, you can see that there's a wide variety of time zones, and this is one team. So if you look at the outreaches, Vancouver to Minsk, that is a very broad arrangement of time zones, about 11 total. However, this doesn't really give you the true picture of how these teams operate. So as I started looking at some of these issues, and Johanna and I started talking more about the book, we realized it wasn't really about the time zones. It was really about this concept of hours of overlap and what hours the team members had available. So if you look at just this upper left chart that the team put together, you see here that they have where they're located, the different hours of the day for their local time zone, and you'll notice that they all have different preferences. So some start early, some start later. Dave and Polly, in one scenario, might be spread across multiple projects. Shouldn't be doing that for the Agile team, but for some of us, that tends to be a reality. So
Well, they had commitments to the rest of the organization. So
yes,
Dave was the leader for the team. He had commitments to recruiting and commitments to sales. Polly was a product owner. She had commitments to be able to talk to customers and to work with product managers and customer support. I mean, only what I find is only the makers, the people in the product development team can really work by themselves and keep to themselves, assuming they are in an agile team and not assigned to anybody else. So, yeah. So these
and you
people
can.
were, yeah.
I was going to say
Sorry.
you could probably tell whose team this was
Mine,
from the
yeah.
way, yeah. So the names have been changed, but uh, with the situation we have now, it could be a similar kind of thing. What if Dave and Polly had kids at home, and those kids might have certain online schooling that they need assistance with, or other things, and so this could be another case where they're taken away from the team. Regardless of the scenario, if you start charting out hours of overlap, or when team members are available as they are distributed, this allows the team to talk about, can we shift some of these hours so that we're more available to each other. So one thing you'll notice in the upper left is the team really only had 3 hours total where they were 100% available to each other. So they only had 3 hours of overlap, which we find is usually not optimal. Now, there were other times where most of them were available, but not everyone. But as this particular team looked at how they could shift their hours around, they ended up with at least 4 hours of overlap, which gave them more opportunities for planning, for retrospectives, and other activities.
They were able to really work together as opposed to the trap of everybody taking their own story. So just by working agreements, right? They didn't nobody had to really time shift. Nobody had to time split. They all happened to be in the same time zone, but now that they had working agreements about when to do which kind of work, they were able to make more time.
Yeah.
So
as Scott said in the chat, is being the same time zone the new co-located? Well, for the next few weeks or months, it could be. So if you haven't done anything like this with your teams and you were previously all in office, it might be worth pulling up a Google Sheet or some kind of shared document where you can map out your hours and see, is there some particular activity we're having a hard time getting together on, and should we shift our hours a little bit? Should we experiment? It's a good conversation for retrospective. It's a good conversation if you're struggling now, and just take time out and have that conversation if there's some particular part of your process that you're struggling with that's around the hours. Okay,
and
good. I'm glad somebody like that.
Yeah, we have a Google spreadsheet that we are happy to share with you, and we will. I am incapable of actually saying the URL, so we will share the URL at the end of this. Okay.
Yes. All right. So there's a few different ways to find more hours. Now, some of these, of course, are when you can travel once again, but just kind of bear with us on this one. So when you have that capability to work with other groups and other locations, other time zones, you might look at what's referred to as the ambassador model. And this model has actually been around quite a while, but who is that person that tends to do a little bit of time shifting so they can overlap with another sub team or another team that are several time zones away. Another is the idea of a co-pilot. So you can think of two facilitators or two leaders kind of working together with different groups within the same team. So they're sharing and splitting that coordination. Johanna, you want to talk about the last two?
Well, let me give an example of the co-pilot. Back in the 90s, when I was starting to work with geographically distributed teams, I had the problem of most of the team in across the U.S., and then always that one poor person, often a tester in India. So there's not enough hours of overlap. But when I realized that I had the ability to have that somebody was willing to work with this tester in India, right? It could be another tester. I often had a product person in both places because I'm very fond of full cross-functional teams in several places as opposed to trying to work across these time zones. So a person who shared or split the role across the various teams, right? A product person and a project person, that really worked. When the co-pilot thing did not work, that meant I needed somebody to be able to time shift every so often. And when you time shift, you say, I'm going to work from noon to 8 p.m. or, God forbid, 4 a.m. to noon, right? Whatever it is that you choose to do. But you are changing your working hours to be available to other people during the day. I have also seen way too much time splitting, which we think is totally nuts. I have a story of the guy next to me in the gym who always looked totally exhausted because he came in, he woke up for a 3 a.m. meeting. He went back to sleep at 4. He was in the gym at about 6:30 in the morning, and then he worked a full day and then had an 8 p.m. meeting at night. And I actually said to him, that is just stupid. You need boundaries around your time. No organization is worth it. You need to tell them you are doing the work of 3 people. So you can do some time splitting sometimes, and you can time shift if you want to. And Mark has this wonderful way of talking about this. If you are volunteering, that's great. If you are voluntold, That's not. So voluntold is from Mark. Did I miss anything, Mark?
No, I think we can move on.
Okay.
So let's talk about the second principle, and this is creating transparency at all levels. What's important about this is it helps with information flow, but it also helps with learning across the distributed organization. So as you can see on the far left, you might have, especially in this scenario where we're all working from home, there might be no team transparency. There might not be a shared board. There might not be any way the team's passing status back and forth. It's an extreme, but we still run into a few teams that everyone's heads down, banging on the keyboard and not coming up for air right away. The better improvement is when there is that transparency on the team. You have team members that in a daily stand-up or through some other frequent mechanism are sharing the good and the bad. Here's where things are working out well, or here's where things are not working out well. Now, a sweet spot, which is why it's in the middle of this particular chart, is when you have full product transparency. So if you have several teams on a product or an entire product line, how are they sharing their status across? So as part of this, it could be there might be some roll-up dashboards that all the teams have access to. It could be something as simple as all the teams have access to each other's task boards. So they're not moving things around in each other's boards, but they can at least see the boards. They might have access to each other's team chat channels. So if they see something that's a little puzzling and they might be dependent on something that's on another team's board, they have that opportunity to kind of pop in and say, hey, I noticed this, and I have a question regarding this. Who can answer that for me? You can take that to the extreme right now too.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So let me talk a little bit about partial corporate transparency, especially now. Nobody has any idea when we're really going to be able to go back to work, right? And whatever back is, it's not going to be what it was before. So the more transparent your organization can be, the calmer the people can be. Now, I happen to, so Mark and I have this book, so we have a little business as a part of this book. We have full transparency between us, and we often share other interesting things about our businesses. But so full corporate transparency might not be your reality, but the more your managers can share, where are you? What is their thinking? What is the project portfolio now? The more transparency at all levels, and if you have to ask for information that you cannot easily see, you do not have enough transparency. So the more transparency you can create, the better your work will be, because you will work on the stuff that makes sense, and you will not work on the stuff that does not make sense.
So let's move on to our third principle here. And this is creating a culture of continuous improvement with experiments. So if you have been an Agile practitioner for a while, you might say, oh, this is obvious. But there's still many teams and organizations that don't have that understanding of setting experiments in different ways. So you might have experiments in one way, and that's kind of the far left, by the book. This is how we do it through a retrospective, and you must follow this template, and that's fine. You know that.
No, it's not fine. It's not fine. Go ahead. Sorry.
So, so Johanna's really good at playing bad cop. I play good cop. So.
It's true. It's true.
So, but actually, what we see with the by the book scenario is there's usually no experimentation because there's so many policies and so many things that lock down parts of the organization. It's hard to make changes. The better position is here in the middle, where you at least have some flexibility to try some things. I'm guessing that of the 41 that are on this call right now, you've probably had to try a lot of collaboration tools over the last 3 weeks. Maybe your organization had some of that. Maybe you found out that some of it worked, some of it didn't. and you had to experiment rapidly to figure out, how do I keep in touch with everybody? We've heard many stories from many places of that. But Johanna, do you want to talk about the strict experiments?
Sure. One of the things I really like is saying, what is our hypothesis? And what data will we want to measure to either prove or disprove our hypothesis? So the scientists, the real scientists, actually try and disprove an hypothesis. I don't care if you try and prove or disprove it, as long as you are measuring something and you decide how long you're going to let this experiment run. I'm very fond of short experiments. So we have an example on the next slide about boards, where this particular team started with a Scrum board, and then they moved to the board on the left, which does not have WIP limits, right? They tried to figure out what are we really doing? How do we manage our work? What is our flow through the system? And once they understood that, that took them about a week or two to figure out. Now they were ready to move to the board on the right side, where they said, we don't really, we don't really have ready first. We really have stories to workshop first. And then we have stories that are ready. And then we can go to dev and unit test, right? Because they had the analysis now as part of their ready, as opposed to something before. And they were able to make this particular board work for them. It took them, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks total to actually experiment. So if you are trying to use the same board you used when you were co-located, it's probably not working for you. You need to at least experiment with your board. And the reason for this is actually on the next slide. So go ahead, Mark.
Oh,
I
I was going to jump in and say, sometimes you're not sure where to start. So a good place to start is mapping out your value stream. So here we have a very simple way of doing this, where you see the steps and the team members involved, how long each step took, and then below the line, how long the team members are waiting for that. So I'm just kind of curious of this group here, and just answer in chat, how many of you have done value streams for your teams? And Johanna, I'll watch that if you want to go ahead and keep talking about it.
So what's really interesting here is that if you look at Dan, UTC -5, he worked on the feature and checked it in and realized after 4 hours that he needed help. What the cycle time magnet in me says, why did you work for 4 hours before you asked for help? And then what caused the wait of 2 hours in your team for you to then see some options? Because by now, look at what Dan is doing. Dan has worked for 4 hours alone. He spent 2 hours waiting, which probably means he went and did something else. Jane spent 2 hours now with him. That's a total of 8 hours. So luckily, it's only a few more minutes of wait time, and then a few minutes of Dan and Jane pairing, and the entire team chatting. But I think it's really interesting. Then Dan continues to work on this for an hour. So Dan is spending much more time than is reasonable for a human being to spend on work. And then he still spends some time, a few minutes, with handing off the work. So I've been working remote from most of my teams for 25 years, right? I've been a consultant for 25 years. I have had to, create boundaries around my work and my home life. So I actually have work life and home life. So this is, when you look at the cycle time and you break it down, now you're thinking, what is reasonable, what is not reasonable. And if you're wondering, I have allergies, because the allergies are now, the trees and the grasses are now out, which is good because we're into spring, but it's bad because I sound like I'm coughing. Okay.
So I'm going to jump in here so Johanna can get a drink if she wants to. So one thing you might notice about this particular value stream is how we incorporate the timelines. So if you do a value stream like this, I would recommend having that hours of overlap chart with it. So just have that handy to the side, because then you can see, how much overlap does Dan and Jane have, or Sam and Brenda, because they are in different zones, or they have different hours of overlap. So that can also kind of help you figure out maybe other opportunities to reduce your cycle time. Anything else you want to jump in on for this one, Johanna? All right.
No, let's keep going.
All right. So now let's talk about practicing pervasive communication. So before we talk about transparency, which sounds like it's the same thing, but it's not. So this is more about leaders communicating key information. So it might be you as a team leader, it might be you as a product owner, scrum master, it might be you as a director, executive. And the question is, do you go with the assumption that if you say something once, that everyone gets it? Because if that's the case, they probably didn't, especially in a distributed organization. What we find is you have to repeat the message a few different ways. And even if you look at some leadership books, there, I forget the one that mentions, 7 times 7 different ways. Sometimes you have to send out a key message. So this might be a change around, hey, here's what's available for all of you in your distributed workspace, or we're actually maybe pivoting on some of our products because we're just not seeing a need right now. So we're going to shift and maybe bring some of you over to another project, or we're still trying to figure out what the implications are. So bear with us, but providing that pervasive messaging. So it could be in an all hands call, sort of like this. It could also be through an email. There might be a posting on an internal site. So in one organization that I worked with, I had one senior leader, senior vice president of the product group, who was very good at, he would post a blog, an internal blog first, to give everyone a heads up. It was usually like a Friday or Monday. And then on Wednesday would be the all hands meeting, where he would take a few questions, but then he would also have an AMA, an Ask Me Anything session, that people could come to and ask questions. And he tried to keep those small. So if there were a lot of questions, he made himself available, especially if it was a big pivot in what the organization was doing. And then share out the results of the Q&A. He would usually ask some of the people who are in the AMAs to help him, but gather some of the questions and answers and put that on the wiki for the organization. So now that information has radiated out several different ways, several different times, and people have that information in some way, shape, or form. The far end, though, is where you might go too far. Johanna, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I'm sure all of you know people who repeat the same message again and again and again, and they don't have anything interesting or new in that message. I will say, wives, this wife tends to do this to her husband. Um, However, this is still the same kind of a thing that we do in organizations. And that's often because we don't know how to say it differently, and we don't realize that we have multiple channels available to us. So, Mark, let's go into the kind of team types first. I think we can go briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, go ahead. Take this one.
So we used to have satellite teams where we had most of the team in one place, 1 or 2 people separate. Satellite teams are interesting. We're not there right now. And then the cluster team has couple people in one location, couple people in another, couple people in another. I often see this with developers on one floor of a building, testers on another floor, the UI person on yet another floor, and maybe sitting with a product owner. So couple people are together, but they're not all together. Now the
And we
next
don't,
one.
and we still don't have this situation now. But if again your team is spread out over multiple time zones, you might have one time zone here, one time zone here. So it's somewhat like that. But really, what we have is this next one.
So this is where everybody is dispersed, and I hope that there is one manager who affiliates with the entire team. We're going to go to the next possible one, but this is why distributed teams have such a bad reputation. Notice that everybody is in a different location and people affiliate with their own managers. So the team is not a team. The team has very weak affinity, um, and the people and the managers really don't have affinity. When you have a siloed and nebula team, which I hope none of you have right now, this is the worst of all possible worlds. And you can fix this if people want to with various communication functions. So Mark, do you want to talk about the communication possibilities?
Sure. So as you're looking at how your teams communicate, it's worth keeping this image in mind. So certainly you can use some asynchronous communication if you, like most of the planet right now, are scouring the internet for anything on distributed. You're probably even coming across some articles that say, oh, asynchronous is the way to go. I don't know how to be a agile team and collaborate and just be asynchronous. I have no idea how that works. So,
Well,
so
I think it's fine if you're pouring the information down into the organization and people are supposed to say, do what you're told. Yeah, you can be asynchronous.
Yeah. But if it's really thinking about the problem, collaborating on the problem, you need far more than asynchronous. This is where you get into some of these other modalities of synchronous communication. So you might be connecting via phone, and it doesn't matter whether it's Slack phone call or Microsoft Teams call, or you have your own VoIP kind of connection now. It's all the same. Or on a face-to-face communication like we have now. It may not feel face-to-face to you because you're not accustomed to it. But when you get teams that tend to work this way, they get very comfortable working in this kind of session. There are teams that pair and mob online. And we can, if that's of interest, let us know. There are several references that we can share out on that one. And then sort of the ultimate is, can you have that shared whiteboard experience? So I know there's many shared whiteboard tools out there. I don't think any of them quite hit the in-person experience, but they're closer to that. One of the things that boosts these different channels, though, is having what we actually have here tonight in that chat back channel. So I've been encouraging you to ask questions or share things in chat. This is extremely important for a distributed team. If they have a dedicated chat channel where all their conversations happen, this is where a lot of the tacit communication that you would have in an office happens online. It happens in chat. So when I'm working with a team, I usually don't have the meeting chat open. I have the team's actual chat channel, and I encourage them to use that instead, because what happens in a planning meeting or retrospective? They're digging up information. They're sharing information from their boards or for some other reports. As soon as the meeting shuts down, the meeting chat disappears. Yes, I know it's logged. Nobody ever digs up those logs. So, so instead, why not just use the chat channel where the team always operates in? Just let them use that. That way the team already has some notes at the end of the meeting. They just go back in their chat to go back and say, oh yeah, I remember how Ian shared that and Sarah shared this information. And then we had some of these questions we captured. It's all captured there in chat. So that's why you see this curve being boosted by using that chat all the time in all their interactions. So that's where that use of chat in both a synchronous and asynchronous way, I think, does boost the team's collaboration.
And let me just say this now. Mark and I paired on every single word in the book together. We did not bounce step anything back and forth except for images, because I am impossible. I am the most patient person, yeah, right, in the world. And when he had an image up, I was trying to point to it and click on it. So we only did images separately, but we wrote every single part of the book together. So pairing and mobbing is totally possible. And we encourage people to do it.
Yeah. So we did it using Zoom. I see Rich Campbell saying that you can do that with Live Share in Visual Studio. There's a few tools out now that allow that. So Rich, thanks for sharing that in chat. Okay, let's move on. So number 5, I'll let you take this.
Yeah, so especially if you use any kind of asynchronous communication, it's really important to assume good intent. Some of us, and I will raise my hand, blame people. If something happens and I'm not happy about it, I will say, what happened, right, with that finger of blame? Some people placate others, which is, well, oh, if Johanna said that, I must have done something stupid. Well, probably not. And this way, if we can stay kind of in the middle where we balance ourselves, the other person, in the context, we can assume good intention. So, and especially if you use a lot of asynchronous communication, you do not have the rich and natural, the music that goes with the words. So it's so important for us to assume good intent on the part of other people.
And you saw me chuckling because it got to the point where we were working on the book that we decided that Fridays were venting day, because some days we would both vent about things that were happening, and we decided, you know what, this is not productive. We're going to say Friday as the venting day. So if we get to Friday, then we can both vent on whatever was happening. So
yeah, okay.
It wasn't just Johanna. So.
I get to swear on Fridays.
Yeah. I wasn't going to put that part in there, but okay.
No, it's true. It's true. Mark is a gentleman, and I swear.
Yeah. Okay, number 6. So, and so Johanna already hinted a little bit in talking about the music of the work. So I'm sure some of you have been on a team, or at least worked with one other team member, where there was an implicit rhythm to how you work. You could sense, you could start to anticipate when somebody would have something done or when they would come up with an idea, just because you got so accustomed to working together. So the idea is that every pairing, every team has this rhythm. We both get a little. This is one of the things we will vent about. We get to venting about some frameworks that will impose the same rhythm on every team everywhere, because we find that's really unnatural for many teams. So I don't get too much in trouble. I'm going to let Johanna take the rest of this one, because I'm about to vent.
Yeah. So what's really, especially if you don't have enough hours of overlap, I don't see how you can use a strict time box. I'm right. If you only have 2 hours of overlap for an entire team, how can you possibly use a time box? When does a time box start and when does it end? And at the same time, not every team is ready for total flow approach. I work with a team that has a cadence of planning and demos and retrospectives, and they, God love them, they have a different cadence for everything. They always do some planning on Mondays and Thursdays. They have Wednesday mornings for demos. They do little kaizens almost every day, and they do retrospectives at a rhythm I don't understand. Sometimes it's every week, sometimes it's more often. They tend to be much more flow based. They are closer to the left side of this. However, they tried to use a time box and they could not figure out how to do it. So if you are collaborating on all the work, which we will talk about in a couple of slides, then you do not need a stand up. And so thinking about what are the rituals and meetings that we need, and if we create a project rhythm in another way, would that change it? So the next slide, Mark, I think
Well,
has.
I want to say
Oh,
one
go
thing
ahead.
really quick.
Yeah.
So on the right here, we're not saying that Scrum won't work. Scrum will work with the distributed team if you have hours of overlap that equate to 6 to 8 hours of overlap.
Right.
You go beyond that, Scrum gets difficult to do because of what Johanna said.
As in only 4 hours of overlap or less.
Yes, yes. And that's where you want to look at more of these flow-based approaches.
So a lot of times people don't realize that an iteration really is a time box. And so if you think about what a time box is, right, you decide the duration of the time box. So Mark and I worked together when we wrote the book in 1 hour time boxes. That's all we did. Right. We had one every day or almost every day. So we had consistent ways of working and delivering. But if we think about how if you think about how work flows through your team, can you use a time box as an iteration? And if you always have stuff remaining at the end of your iteration, you might want to think about a different way to organize. Might be worth thinking about.
All right, ready to move on?
Yeah.
Because we're getting close.
Yeah.
Okay, so this I think is probably one of the most important ones for the time we're in now, and this is creating resilience. So I'm guessing some of you had some time to prep before you were moved out of your offices. Some of you might have been voluntold or yanked out of your offices in this case. This is where having some resilience on the team helps tremendously. Uh, and essentially it's not only talking about the work, but sharing what's happening both in your personal context, because whenever you have a meeting like this, you're bringing part of the meeting room with you. You're bringing part of this home context with you. So don't try to block it out, just go with it. So I often say that working from home means every day is bring your pet or child or significant other to work day. Okay, so if they show up in the background, hopefully they're dressed, but but it's okay. So I'm going to show you really quick what I do. So you see that red light on my door, hopefully. So there's one on the inside and the outside of my office door. So my family knows when I have that light on, I have the camera on, so they should be appropriately prepared. It also means that if my kids come in, they automatically get introduced to everyone in the meeting. Strangely enough, they never come in when that light's on. So it's, well, so I was going to say, so it's important to have some conversations with your team about what you're willing to share, because some don't want to share that, some do, and talk about, you know, what are we all comfortable sharing. I'm quite comfortable sharing that, but also it helps in this situation to share, you know, how there might be some idle time as you're kind of wrestling with working from home. It does happen. It's strange, but it does happen. And you might say, you know, I'd really like to learn, you know, I'm more of a back-end developer. I'd like to learn more of the front end, or I want to learn more design. So you might want to talk about that as a way to build resilience in the team. Can you use some of the work you're doing now to maybe do some pairing and share some skills, just in case something happens down the road and somebody's not well, and maybe you can't do everything they do, but you can step in and do a little bit. And then they're not feeling pressure to be online and working through it. That's where you can serve that team member.
So Scott has this lovely quote. We are not working from home. We are at home in a huge crisis trying to work. This is so
I'm
true.
stealing that, Scott.
I am too. I really love it.
I will attribute you.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important we talk about the work and the personal stuff and what we're interested in. Because so Mark and I have collaborated on other stuff since all of this started, and we have said we often have a little check-in when we start. I think it's really important for us to understand what's going on for other people as we go and do this. So, can we go back to default to collaboration, please?
Yes, sorry. It tends to jump around sometimes when I jump into chat.
Oh, okay. Where did collab? Okay. So,
okay.
All right. So, let's talk about collaboration. A lot of, especially managers, do not realize that software is a team sport. And software is, when we create a product, it's really the instantiation of our learning. So, too many teams, especially when they're new to remote work, go off and say, I'm going to work alone. Right. So Dave, in our cycle time example, said, I got this. I'm working alone. I'm going to do it. It's all good until it's not so good. And then we happen to like pairing and other real-time communication, so people understand that we are working together. I am a huge fan of mobbing. Uh, Mark, you've mobbed remotely, haven't you?
We've had some teams that have done it remotely. I've not participated. I've observed them mob.
Yeah.
So and this is where experimentation comes in. So one of the teams I noticed, who they had daily stand-ups, but they're very collaborative, and they've just finally said, you know what, let's block out an hour for stand-up. We'll do 5 to 10 minutes of actual stand-up, and then we'll see who wants to pair or mob. Well, they all mobbed every time because they like to hear what each of them were working on. So one would say, okay, I have a problem today. Let me walk through it with you guys. And so they would just all start working together for about an hour, sometimes 90 minutes. But they had a very good cross-working knowledge of that code base because they did that almost every day.
Yeah. So it's really important to think, how can we default to collaboration the more dispersed we are, so that we have the benefit of other people's brains on our problems, and that other people give us a little resilience in our work, as Mark was saying before.
So we're getting close to our time. We can certainly hang on for a bit.
Oh,
or
we
at least
will.
I can. I know Johanna.
We'll hang on. Yeah. I'll hang on, if nothing else.
Well, I can hang on too. So, so again, here are the 8 principles that we talked to, but we might have covered some things that you were asked, you want more questions, you have more questions, you want more answers. Here are some ways to reach us, but I think we'll turn it back over to our host and see how we want to deal with questions or any other feedback.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think we maybe got 1 or 2 in the chat. Just firstly to say thanks for that to you both. That was fab. Really topical. Very relevant, I think, to everyone who joined this evening. And yeah, I took a lot from that actually. And I am enjoying your book as well, as I said. You know, that was great. I think a lot of us really liked the spreadsheet, so thanks for sharing that,
Thank
Mark.
you.
That's fab. I'm sure people will make great use of that. And I was blown away by the statement that you collaborated on your book to the extent that you paired on every single word. I think
every single one, yeah.
That's quite something.
Yeah. We're gonna have to do that in our book, Seth.
I think we are, Scott. I think we are.
There you go.
Mark,
you've set the benchmark right there.
Mark, how about if we stop the share and then we can see everybody's faces? And
what I'll do is I'll just look through the chat, and I did get one great question, and I took a note of because I didn't want to lose it, and that was from Ian, and that was around, you kind of touched on it, but it might be good to elaborate a little. So talking a lot about teams being geographically dispersed across some fairly wide time zones. So how do you avoid folk who are kind of maybe in the middle time zones between a whole bunch of time zones, basically getting kind of pulled in too many directions, so they're getting pulled from either end effectively? What are your thoughts and suggestions around how to kind of handle that? Any tips or recommendations for our audience?
Can I start, Mark? Is that okay?
I figured you were going to, so that's why.
All right. So it does not matter what Agile approach or any approach you use. Every team can manage their work in progress. Any team can set WIP limits. And if you have 6 people on the team, I really like to say we will have no more than 2 or 3 items in progress. Right? And I prefer 2, not 3. So that means that especially if you have widely dispersed teams across many time zones, that people can self-organize to say, I'm willing to work with these 2 or 3 people over here, and these 2 or 3 people over there will work on something else. And then the team really needs to do a retrospective or at least a little Kaizen and say, do we have one team or do we have 2 teams?
Yeah. And I was going to say something similar, that if you've got people in the middle time zones getting pulled multiple directions, that could be a hint that team is a little bit big if they're getting pulled in so many directions.
Great. I've got a few questions coming through, so just while we've got a little bit of time, here's a really good one actually, and I think a lot of us would probably like to ask this question. So when facilitating remote meetings, you kind of miss the visual cues that sometimes, you know, someone might, when they're talking, or get used to sort of reading them, body language, etc. How do you also encourage people to speak up?
So I'll jump in on this one. So I'm sitting here counting really quickly. We've got right now 35, only 14, 15 have their cameras on. So that's the first thing, is can you encourage people to have their camera on? Some might have difficulty, especially if they were rapidly ejected out of the office, where they may not either have a camera or an operating camera on their laptop. I've been in that situation where I've had it on my desk for a while and it's never worked. But in those cases where cameras aren't possible, this is where you might want to use something like a buddy system. So you might say, okay, for those who are more in the meeting, maybe more visual, or tend to be jumping in more often, can you buddy up with somebody who doesn't feel like they can break in? So it's not the facilitator calling them out. It's more, hey, can you check in with your buddy? So this also takes sort of the cognitive load off of you as facilitator, if you can do this. Now, typically I've done this when I'm in one of those satellite team situations where most of the team is in the room with me, but there's a few satellites, and I'll ask people in the room, can you buddy up with our remote folks? But it works, the buddy system works in different ways. So just look at how can you balance the communication? Can you use the buddy approach for that? Johanna and I were actually using a different pattern, that co-pilot pattern. So we were bouncing back and forth, kind of co-facilitating, but you notice that we would, either one of us would tend to jump into the chat and notice what was happening in the chat, looking at anybody sharing things that back channel that maybe in a normal meeting they feel like they couldn't break in. So using the back channel, using buddy system, or the co-pilot pattern, those are different ways that you can also read that language. But if you can encourage people to use video, so one thing I'll share with people is, you know, it's important to use video because you might lose important body language like this. You know, if I didn't have my camera on, you'd miss that. So
we don't want to miss that.
Yeah. So
No.
there you go.
No.
But there's times where, you know, especially for smaller team meetings, make it fun and encourage people to have their camera on, like silly hat day or something like that. But it encourages people to get comfortable with the camera that way. So hopefully that helps.
we've actually been doing a bit of that in our office. So I wasn't aware of it, so I joined the call late, and everybody was actually wearing a hat. And I was like, "What's going on? I missed the memo." No, it was really quite good. So related to that, so that's brilliant. I think that's a lot of really good tips there. But kind of just an extension of that, really, sort of alongside, the visual cues. How do you go about kind of encouraging people who are not kind of giving feedback or not participating without calling them out? I mean, how can you try to? Because it's different if you're all obviously co-located, sitting in a room. How do you do that when everybody's dispersed? Any suggestions or tips?
Yeah, and this starts from the beginning of the meeting. I actually, especially now, really like to have a one-word check-in. And I'm not, some people's one word are 3 sentences, but mostly it's a one word or a phrase. And when you do that, everybody's voice gets into the room. And that helps the ease of participating. Another couple of things is if you have an agenda for this meeting, send it out 24 hours in advance and send it out again. And if you have a shared document, make sure everybody has the link to that shared document, again, 24 hours in advance and just before the meeting or in the chat. I can say this as an extrovert. Most meetings are very comfortable for me. I am happy to think off the top of my head. Right, Mark? Yeah, so he's thinking. So I put him on
the other questions I'm seeing.
Yeah, sorry. But this is how we work, right? I need to be told when to shut up. And when Mark does that, when he has his hand across his mouth, that means he's thinking. So part of it is in the working agreements. What do you look like when you're thinking? And you only need one extrovert to have a horrible meeting, right? And I can say this because I am. So how can you make it comfortable for everybody in the meeting? This means that we all need to be a little self-aware, and differently self-aware than we were when we were co-located.
And I want to say something that's unique about this environment as well. So Johanna, hopefully it is safe that I mentioned that I'm probably the more empathetic of the pair.
Oh God, yes. Oh yes.
So
there's
I'm
no
also
question about it.
I'm also distracted by Rona's co-pilot there, who's probably ready for bedtime. Hello. This is where sometimes I'll point out my stuffed animals on the shelves back there, and you get to try to guess who they are. But things like that. That again, it's being open and inviting. But also the other point I wanted to make is we are in difficult times, and I would say be very careful about trying to pull everyone into a conversation right now. What you might want to do, and this depends on how comfortable you are with chat, is if you notice somebody in particular being very quiet, you might want to send like a direct message in chat and say, "Hey, are you okay? I notice you're being even more quiet than normal." You might know this person as a quiet person, but they do chime in. They might, depending on how they respond, you may or may not say, "Hey, do you need to talk about it later?" Just being available to the other person to get some things out in the open that they're concerned about, the current situation, being there for each other. That's part of that resilience that we're talking about. And you don't have to be a team leader to do that. You just have to be a good team member to do that.
And Pierre keeps writing good stuff in the chat. So if you're not reading the chat, hi Pierre, it's so nice to see you. We have similar backgrounds. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm not sure I've ever seen Pierre in person.
Okay. All right. So, but I want to point out, as others had mentioned in chat about liberating structures, those are great way to kind of equalize the communication. There was another one that I missed it. So, because I got distracted by Rona's co-pilot.
Yeah, and I was going through them. Yeah, I think I kind of.
No, that's fine, Rona.
I think a lot of people were just acknowledging some of the great suggestions that you've made.
Yeah.
The one-word check-in seems to have gone down really well, and I think I think a few of us have tried that, and I think, as somebody had said, it's a brilliant way to just get people to open up. And I think Deepak said once somebody spoke, and that's it, that they're a little bit more comfortable, and they're more likely to perhaps continue to participate. So yeah, I think that's a great technique. I've got one, because it'll be okay for time. Johanna, you've got a few more minutes.
I'm fine. Yeah, I got another 20 minutes
somewhere to be
before tonight is the first night of Passover, everybody, and I will be preparing for the Seder later on tonight. So the food is all ready. I do have other prep to do. So yes.
Fantastic. So we talked earlier about when you were talking about the sort of pervasive communication, and we're talking about sort of over communicating. So that's a kind of interesting topic for me. So I get that. So what about striking that balance between communicating, trying to get the messages across using different channels, but then unfortunately to some it may feel like noise, or the message might get diluted. How do you go about striking the balance?
I got to jump in on this one. So this is where you need to have a conversation about team communications and how you bring that into your working agreement. So I've been on some teams where everybody wants to work through email. That drives me nuts. But if that works for the majority of that team, I will go with it. But it's bring that conversation out in the open. What do you need as sort of FYI informational things, and is it okay to send that via email? Would you want that if you use Basecamp, for instance? Do you want it in Basecamp or Wiki or something like that, and just let people know it's there? It doesn't have to be immediate. And then for the more immediate things, how do you let people know so that you get a response, especially if it's an emergency? Oh, I think the server might be burning. So you might want to have some more urgency in that message. And again, how would you signal that? Also signal around miscommunication. So I'll point out in the chat when we were talking about kids, Babs had made the comment about, I've met many of my kids, or many of my coworkers' kids, and I said, I bet you have Babs, and autocorrect said babe. And I went, oh, not my intention, Babs, not my intention. So again,
that's definitely against the code of connection, Mark.
Oh, I know. Don't kick me out. Let me finish my sentence. But again, especially if we're relying on just asynchronous communication, how quickly could that be misinterpreted? And if that was in a very public chat channel, how quickly could that be misinterpreted? So again, having some working agreements, and I'm glad that Babs is smiling, which means she doesn't hate me right now. So, but also, how do you deal with miscommunication? So another quick story, I worked with one CTO who had the rule of when something goes back and forth in email or anything like that, more than twice, call. And one time he and I got in, this is very early in my career, we got in a heated argument in email. I sent the second message, he immediately called. I went, oh, he's serious about this. And we talked about it. And then I actually sent an email after that. I said, okay, Scott and I talked, and, I realized I have a misunderstanding about this. I still think I'm right about this one. I had a bit of an attitude though, but again, getting to that higher level of communication, that higher communication channel, so that when you do have misunderstandings, have some working agreements around that. Don't let the debate go back and forth in GitHub or chat or whatever. Just stop, because it's not helping anybody.
So
definitely think about there.
There's also a management technique called receipt for comprehension. So if I say something, right, and I then say, when I say this, what do you understand? Repeat back to me using your own words. And I find that is very helpful. And especially if you are willing to not do just the broadcast. I will say from the management perspective, I used to do this until I learned otherwise. And many managers now are under so much pressure that they feel the need to broadcast. as opposed to have a two-way conversation. So even I, the non-empathetic person, says, oh yeah, maybe a little empathy would go a long way. And if we can do the receipt for comprehension piece, that also helps with a pervasive communication.
Excellent, brilliant. Not had any more questions come in. Got about, just a little over 10 minutes, so don't want to encroach on your plans for the rest of the day. So
well, wait a minute, Scott asked, how do we stop meetings? Right?
Yeah, Scott says that all the time.
So no, this is really important. This is why you have an agenda. And when you're done with the agenda, you say, thank you. Or you might say, is there anything else? Pierre, you're shaking your head. Either can I unmute you, or can you unmute yourself? Here, I'm going to unmute you.
That's very, very bad idea of yours.
Okay.
When I talk, I never stop. Agenda is a double-edged knife. It's usually people do too much in the agenda for very too short time. The problem is with distances, everything is amplified. So have just 4 points for an hour, nothing more.
Oh,
then you can have, and stopping is like saying to your kid, hey darling, it's time to go to bed. You don't say at 8, you have to say it 15 minutes earlier. Hey, sweetie, and this is how you bring, because usually what we have, people just time boxing also, oh, now you have 10 seconds to speak out. It's just a lounge, right? It's not possible. So the trick is, all on the facilitation is you let the extrovert speaking at the end, the introverts not at the beginning, but maybe number 2, number 3, is so you can come roll out the thing. So Scott and me, you have to let us talk at the end, right? Because we're following the whole thing, right? But if you get this, it's the behavior of what you're doing. Yeah. That was my 5 seconds. Sorry.
Well, and this is also where good facilitation techniques come in, or even more recently, something like liberating structures that gives a more balance to the communications as well. And sorry, I see more kids. I got to wave. So, but I was also going to say, we kind of slipped in there that we were welcome to stay past the hour. Some have already dropped off. That's fine. Some have gone into avatar mode, which means they may be asleep. They may not. I don't know, but that's okay. If they're comfortable just listening, that's fine. I realize it's late for some, and you have it's getting late in the evening there, and you need to get on with things. So
yeah, no, absolutely not. Usually about 8 thereafter, as we go into the Q&A, sometimes folk drop off, as you say, they've got kids to put to bed, etc.
So let me add one more thing.
Okay.
If you only have 45 or 50-minute meetings, and you keep the number of agenda items to 3 or 4, as Pierre said, you are often able to stop a meeting on time. Okay, go on.
Fabulous. Yep, absolutely. No, Scott and I work together, and Scott's been doing a great job of trying to make suggestions around ways we can change our ways of working in our rapidly changing landscape. So yeah, absolutely. We need to keep finding out what works and experimenting until we find something that does work. And as long as we're open to that, I think, we'll succeed. Just a couple of quick things. I'm conscious folk will drop off. Somebody did ask Scott, so just before I do a couple of announcements and explain what we've got coming up, really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you both. It was fabulous and an excellent Q&A, a lot of good participation. We could do it because Zoom have introduced the new reaction, so I'm going to put up my virtual clap. There you go, my virtual clap. So there you go, done. I just wanted to do that, to be honest. Yeah, a few virtual claps coming up.
Oh, look at that. I really like that.
So, I think it's really cool. So just while I do a couple of announcements, virtual claps all around. So as those of you have joined previous events of ours, we're running a virtual series. We do these every Wednesday. got a really good lineup over the next few weeks, actually, for the remainder of the month and well into May and beyond. Next week, we have Colin Godfrey talking about mental agility in the current climate we're in with the global pandemic. Having spoken to him, that will be fabulous. He's got amazing experience and insight. So if you're interested in that, do please sign up. You can join our meetups through Meetup. We're there, that's where we publicise them. And you can also join our LinkedIn group. If you're interested, happy for people to come in and communicate other things and ideas and generate some conversation. I'll send out some of this information in the meetup after. If you also have any feedback, feel free to provide us that. I'll also share our email address in the meetup after, so you can do that. And the week after that, so the 15th is the mental agility COVID session, and the week after that, the 22nd, we have Jose Cazell, who many of you will know is a good friend of mine. He's actually doing a great session on hints and tips around virtual meeting facilitation. So again, that will be a really good session, a lot of relevant stuff in there, very topical. So if that's of interest to you, please sign up for that one. And
have we got pirates? Have we got pirates?
Pirates is further down. I'm not going to go through them all because there's quite a lot of them. Because if you want to find out what other ones we've got going on,
I want pirates.
Sign up. We've got pirates. It's coming. You'll have to wait.
You'll be getting tasered, Scott.
Absolutely. And on the 21st, our friends at Lean Agile Edinburgh also have a meetup. That will be a virtual Lean Coffee. If any of you are interested in that, do please sign up for that. And yeah, we do have a whole bunch of other events for you. Hope you enjoyed this one. Great to have you all here tonight. Really good session. And good afternoon or good evening, wherever you happen to be. And we hope we'll see you again. So thanks again to our speakers. Enjoyed hosting the session. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm going to stop the recording now. Okay.
Yeah.